beauty, welcome back to my channel. Today we're gonna do the alphabet soup tag started by Sean over at Sean the Book Maniac. He's gonna be doing an entire series of letter tags where each tag is going to correspond to a letter of the alphabet. He started with A and he's since released a second video, but today I'm going to respond to the first video which he released on July 4, 2019. It's taken me this long to respond even though I was tagged in the original video. I don't know why it's taking me so long, but today we're going to do the video. A is for author. There are 13 prompts, so we're going to talk about 13 books. I'm going to mention 13 books very briefly. And the first prompt is A is for author. Mention a good book that was written by an author whose first or last name starts with A. Bonus points if the author's first and last name start with A. And I do have Aaah Al-Sayed, Brief Chronicles of Another Stupid Heartbreak, which is YA romance, which is surprising how much I like this book. I read this one earlier this year. This is an arc that I got from the publisher. This one is about a teenage writer who's living in New York, and the summer between high school and college, she and her high school boyfriend have broken up, and she has a contract with an online magazine where she writes articles for them, and they've asked her to write about love, and her boyfriend has broken up with her because they don't want to start a long-distance relationship as they go into college. Instead of writing about the challenges that she's having with her own boyfriend, she finds another couple who's experiencing the same challenge but dealing with it in a different way. And even though she has all this fodder to write her journal article, she can't seem to get over the writer's block. And I really like this book because it's set in New York, because it seemed like such a realistic story, and also because of how the author, Aaah Al-Sayed, dealt with this challenge, because it does involve a little bit of a love triangle, love interest, but I also like the way he resolved the trope. And yeah, I thought this was a really good book, and so this is my choice for a book where the author's name, first and last name, begin with A, and I thought it was a really good book. So that's my response to challenge prompt number 1. The second prompt is A is for, well, A, and that is mention the book, the last book that you read that had A in the title, the article A, and that would be my nonfiction read, A Little History of the World by E.H. Gombrich. I read this one earlier. Well, I started reading this in July, completed reading it in August. This was to have discussions with one of my students who I tutor during the summer. He had to read this book to prepare himself for high school history, high school world history. And I thought that this was a really good introduction to some of the rises and falls and interactions between cultures throughout our history. And I really enjoyed using this as a refresher course for going over some of the history that I've already known, and also learning things about history that I wasn't very familiar with. My student, I mean, he found it a little tedious that he had to do all this summer reading, but we enjoyed discussing it anyway. Prompt number 3 is a book that made you angry, and for that I'm choosing Americana by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. And I loved a big part of this book. The reason it made me angry was because I felt like the main character, what she did at the end of the book didn't match up with who she had been for the rest of the story. And I felt a little angered by her choices, because while I felt like I identified with the main character for most of the story, her immigrant background and the experiences that she had as an immigrant coming from Africa and trying to assimilate and integrate and pursue her ambitions in America, I felt like the choices that she made at the end of the story didn't match up. They didn't seem like a natural conclusion to what she had gone through, what she said she was about. And so after reading 500 and something pages, the last like 50 pages of this book just really angered me. And so yeah, it's still a book that angers me. I've gone on to read and love, I still love this author's writings, and I'll still read her books. But this book in particular, just didn't like the resolution. Prompt number 4, A is for awesome, a top read of recent years. I'm choosing one of the books that I've rated the highest since this year, and this is A Known World by Edward P. Jones. I absolutely love this book. This is a Pulitzer Prize winning novel about slavery and exploring slavery through an alternate view, where we have black people who are former slaves themselves who now own slaves, and the author imagines this cross culture, this nouveau rich black society, and the challenges that they have fitting in because they no longer are a part of the traditional in slavery, traditional African American culture, but they also don't quite fit in with their white counterparts who are slave owners. And I absolutely loved his treatment of the challenges and the compromises that all these characters had to face. I admired his exploration of religion and culture and education and so much that he dealt with in this book, and I absolutely loved it. I read this one in February as a buddy read. Prompt number 5 is A is for Aaah, a book that has 3 or more A's in the title, and for that I'm choosing The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. This book was first published in the 1980s, and it took me a really long time, but I finally read it last year. This book has enjoyed an increasing surge in popularity. Number one, because adaptation was made last year or maybe the year before, and also because Margaret Atwood has finally written a follow-up. A sequel has been announced. It has been nominated for the Booker Prize this year. It's not yet being released, but I want to read the sequel when it comes out. So for now, A is for Aaah. 3 A's in The Handmaid's Tale. Prompt number 6, which is A is for annoying. Mention a character that drove you up the wall. And this is one of my recent reads, Viola de Grado's Hollow Heart. This is translated fiction, translated from the Italian, and it chronicles a suicide narrated by the person who kills herself, and it goes back and forth between her interaction in her life as well as what caused her to commit suicide and her narrating the afterlife. And the thing that drove me up the wall with this character, the thing that really annoyed me about her, was that while she made a very conscious decision to kill herself, she doesn't seem like she wanted to deal with the repercussions of being dead. And so while she was dead, she wanted to revisit life, and she wanted to interact with people who were still alive, and she wanted to have influence over them, as though she wanted the best of both worlds. And I felt like that made her a really annoying character, and so this is my choice for A is for annoying. Prompt number 6. Prompt number 7, A is for ambivalent, a book that you're still not sure how you feel about. I read Black Leopard Red Wolf by Marlon James earlier this year, and I wanted to do a full review of this one, and I still haven't been able to do it because I just can't seem to reconcile my complete feelings about this book, whether I think it is brilliant enough to say I love it, or whether there were just things about it that felt like they were way too graphic for me. So my ambivalence has led me to stay mostly silent on this book, in that I haven't been able to completely express myself in a review video. So I'm still ambivalent, still a little undecided about my overall thoughts on this book. What I think is going to happen is that I'm going to reread this book when the next book in the trilogy is released, because what Marlon James said in his discussion when I went to see him on the day this book was released, he said that the subsequent books in the trilogy are going to revisit the story, but from other perspectives. And I'm kind of waiting to see how I feel about this story, not just from the perspective that's discussed in this book, but also how it's told by other people, other characters, other players in this narrative. So like I said, I think the book is brilliant. I just also think it's way too graphic, just way too dark, unnecessarily dark. So I'm going to be talking about this at some point when I've had a chance to read the rest of the story, I think. Prompt number A is for anticipation, a book, not necessarily a new release, that you're really looking forward to reading, and for that I have A Confederacy of Dunces by John Kennedy Toole. This is a Pulitzer Prize winning novel, and I like the backstory to this book, even though I haven't read the story itself yet, in that the author believed in his book so much that when he wrote it and shopped it around and publishers rejected it left, right, and center, he couldn't deal with the rejection. He committed suicide, and after his death, his mother got it published and it won the Pulitzer Prize. He won the Pulitzer posthumously for this novel, and I've wanted to read it for a really long time. I finally got my hands on a copy some months ago, and I still haven't gotten a chance to read it, just because well, it's kind of big. It's over 400 pages, and I'm gonna make room in my TBR for it sometime, but I haven't yet. So Confederacy of Dunces is my response for challenge number 8. Number 9A is for actually a book that you didn't expect to like but did. Ruth Ware's The Turn of the Key is one of the books that I finished most recently, and I was surprised by how much I like this book because I've read other books by this author and felt like I liked the book up to the resolution, at which point I didn't care so much for the story anymore just because of how the entire story resolved. But this one I liked all the way through, and so I went into this one with hesitation, but I liked how the author treated a lot of the elements that she incorporated in the story, so I didn't expect to like it as much as I did. I thought that I would like the beginning, but I actually like the whole book. So actually this one surprised me. Number 10A is for Affected, and for this one, Sean says a character, a book, or a writer you feel is pretentious. And while I was thinking about this challenge, I wasn't sure how I felt, whether I was comfortable calling someone pretentious. So I did a Google search of pretentious writers just to see what would come up, and I found an article that listed some writers who they called pretentious, like the top 25 pretentious writers or so. And interestingly enough, one of the authors is one that I feel a little conflicted about his books. I own 3 of his books. I've read 2 of them so far. I love the first one, did not like the second one, and so I've kind of put off reading the third one. And that author is Jonathan Safran Foer. Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close. I absolutely love this book. It's about a young boy whose father was killed on 9/11, and he's still reeling from the loss and dealing with the guilt that he feels that he somehow caused his father's death on 9/11 in the World Trade Center attacks. And I like the way the author dealt with the story, that it included a lot of emotion, and you could see the people in his life, the adults in his life, trying to arrange things from afar, but not crowding this kid, allowing him to think that he was working things out on his own. And I admire that so much. I really like the story. I really enjoy the multiplicity of formats and techniques that the author used to present the story. Like there were pictures, there were colors, I loved it. But next I read his Everything is Illuminated, and in this one he has a character with the same name as the author, and it's supposed to mirror some trip that he took to the Ukraine to kind of find his roots after his ancestors had escaped the war. And there was just too much back and forth with language and expression, and there was just too much. There was just too much in this story, and I felt like if I had to call a character or a writer pretentious, that this would have been the book that stood out for me. But I wasn't completely put off by this book because I like this book so much, and so I bought his Eating Animals, which is social science. It is his discussion of his foray into vegetarianism, and I still think I'm gonna read it, even though I'm not so sure how I feel about this person. I think after reading his essay, I might have a little bit more of a grip on how I feel about him as a writer. So for now, I'm saying that this is my answer for pretentious writer, just because his name appears on that list. I'm not necessarily calling him pretentious. I'm just responding to what the article said about him for now. From number 11, A is for How's It Going, eh? And that is a book by a Canadian writer that you liked or are looking forward to reading. And Malcolm Gladwell is a Canadian writer, and I've read all of his books. He's a nonfiction writer, he's a journalist, and he's published several nonfiction books where he explores popular ideas and kind of debunk some of that popular theory by giving a scientific proof or some economic proof or some well-researched thought experiment that is supposed to prove that what was a popular idea is not really true. And I enjoy that kind of writing. I enjoy his journalistic endeavors, and Outliers was the first of his books I think that he published. It was also the first of his books that I read, and I really enjoyed the theories that he has put forward in here. This is the book that popularized the 10,000 hours theory, where he says a lot of people who we consider to be geniuses or consider to be extremely gifted, it's not just because they are talented at birth, it's because of how much time they have spent working on creating their expertise. And I admire his writing so much. He has Jamaican roots, but he identifies as Canadian, and so I'm calling him my Canadian writer here. I have several other Canadian writers that I could have mentioned, but Malcolm Gladwell is one of my favorite nonfiction writers, so I had to mention him here since Sean asked for Canadian writers. Challenge number 12A is for Anticlimactic, a book that you thought fizzled out at the end. I could go back and tell you about Americana because I loved so much of this book. This book was a 5-star for me almost all the way through until the last 50 pages. So I'm going to mention it here again just because I was so angered by it. So that is my response for Anticlimactic, because I love that book up until the choices that Ifemela started to make at the end of the story. And so prompt number 13 is just to tag some booktubers, and I'm not going to tag anyone specifically because this tag has been around since the beginning of July. I'm probably the last person to do it. So if you are a booktuber, if you have a booktube channel and you haven't been tagged, you haven't done this tag, and you're watching this video, consider that I have tagged you and do it. Tell everyone that I told you to do it. And if you're not a booktuber and you just like to respond to these questions, I'm going to put a complete list of the prompts in the description box down below. So if you're comfortable, you could write your answers in the comments down below or email them to me. I'd love to hear your responses to these prompts as well. So that's A is for author, the Alphabet Soup book tag number 1 in the series. I'm going to be doing the next one in the series sometime. It takes me a while sometimes to respond to tags, so it might be a while before I get to that video, but for now, thanks for watching this one. Give me a thumbs up if you liked it. If you can ignore the sweaty face because it is really humid in New York today. I'm trying to make videos, but the environment isn't making it very easy. So I hope you subscribe anyway. Cooler weather is coming. I'll look a little bit more presentable for the camera. Until then, let's talk in the comments, and until next time, happy reading. Bye.